In today's episode, I'm covering one of the easiest yet most powerful messaging rules that almost every entrepreneur misses. So keep listening. Hi, I'm Brandon Lucero, and you're about to experience the new way to thrive in business, entrepreneurship, and life by leaning into who you are, what you love, and standing up for what you want to create. Get ready, because this is where we go against the grain, say no to outdated society norms, and we say yes to change in order to create a happier, more fulfilled world. Welcome to the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm really excited today. One of the reasons, and I say that all the time, I got to figure out a new way to open up these podcast episodes, but I am excited. And you know what? That's just how I live my life. I live my life really excited. So the reason why I'm really excited today is because we're going to talk messaging. And it's been a couple episodes since we've talked messaging. And obviously, as this being the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast, we talk all things entrepreneurship. We talk about the new wave of entrepreneurship. We talk about kids and opportunities and perspective on life and a bunch of that type of stuff. But messaging is our jam. And so I really like putting together messaging-based episodes. And this one is going to be a really good one. It's going to be a really fun one. And this might be one of the easiest yet most powerful messaging rules that I see 99.9% of entrepreneurs make all the time. It's a big mistake. And usually the top 1%, so like the people that have compelling podcasts, the people that write best-selling books, they all understand this concept. And when we break down this concept on today's episode, you're almost going to be left with like, why didn't I think of that? How did I not realize this? Because once you recognize this, you're going to see it everywhere in all the best-selling books. You're going to see it in probably some of the best podcast episodes, the best pieces of content online. And if you are a Video 4X member, then you've heard me say this all the time, is we never just want to state something and move on. You always want to back up what you're saying. And what I mean by this is you're going to have beliefs, you're going to have things that you want to stand for. You have ideas on what the best solution is or how to help someone with something. If you're a business owner, you're helping someone with something. And what most people will do is they'll either, especially when they start getting into thought reversals, they'll get into just trying to be right, or they'll try to just explain why they're right or why they're better. And that never, ever, hardly ever works. And one of the reasons why that doesn't work is because you're explaining something to someone. And I'm going to give you guys an example here so this makes a little bit more sense. But when you're explaining something to someone, what you're trying to do is say, I'm right and you're wrong. And you're not getting to the foundation of where their belief or where their opinion was created. And what happens if you start saying things and you don't back it up, if the person doesn't already believe you, they're not following you on a subconscious level. And I'll give you an example of this. Like when we helped James Wedmore rewrite his video series, there was a line in there that I always remember. And he said, there was 3 lines. It was something like, he said, Instagram is not a business. A launch is not a business. And there was one other one that I can't remember, but I remember those 2 specifically. And he moved on and he didn't say anything. The problem with that is if the person believes that Instagram is a business, well, guess what? Now they're not following you anymore on a subconscious level. They might still watch, but on a subconscious level, you've already lost them. And what we want is what I call the head nod effect. We want you to be so compelling and be so influential and persuasive that when you explain someone, everyone that's listening has no option but to follow you, and they start to get the head nod effect. Like, yeah, oh my gosh, that is true. That is true. And so what we want to do is we always want to back things up, and we don't want to explain. Okay. And so we're going to go through this. I have a ton of examples to bring you guys through. We're actually going to open up Simon Sinek's book, and I'm going to read you guys a bunch of stuff in here because there's 3 things that he does really well that totally show you exactly what I'm doing here. Now, going back to the example with James Wedmore, what we want to do is we want to say things like Instagram is not a business And then instead of talking about like statistics of a business and all of those things, we could, like, because that would be explaining if you're just like, because statistically a business is this and blah, 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 and that doesn't really convince anyone of anything. However, if we said Instagram is not a business, because it's missing, X, Y, and Z, or if we said a launch is not a business because it's missing the one thing every successful business has, which is consistent, scalable, and predictable income. Can you find me any Fortune 500 company that doesn't know relatively how much money or where their money is coming from month after month after month? No. And why aren't all Fortune 500 companies running their business based off a launch? Because it doesn't give you that consistent, predictable, scalable income. And in that moment, just by backing it up with what we call a counterexample, people go like, oh my God, he's right. Or they get the head nod effect, like, yeah, that does make sense. Or if we said, Instagram is not a business because followers don't mean sales, or we said Instagram is not a business because, followers don't mean sales, or we said Instagram is not a business because it's dependent on a platform that you have no control over, which means you have no control over your business. Well, now you start to show the flaws in that belief. People start to go like, oh, yeah, he's right. And if I backed it up with, if having an Instagram following was a business, then why aren't, again, the Fortune 500 companies all focusing on building a massive following on Instagram? They're more focused on sales and bigger and better things. And so what we have to do is I have 4 things that I want to go through with you guys in order to figure out how to explain or to persuade and back up versus explaining. What we want to do is some key things to look at. If you find yourself that you're trying to be right instead of discrediting the original belief, you're probably explaining. If you're trying to convince someone by using statistics, you're probably explaining. And the reason why is because when you start to use statistics, when you start to talk about how your way is better, what you aren't doing is you aren't focusing on the belief that the person actually holds, because that's what all of this is. All of this is based off of beliefs. If someone thinks a launch is a business, that is a belief. If someone thinks Instagram is a business, that is a belief. And so when you have a point or you have a message or you have something that you need to get across because you have a better way, what we really should be doing is looking at the beliefs that are being held by the industry and focus on dismantling those, because when we can dismantle those, we're almost unshackling people from the beliefs that are holding them down. And you can't move someone to a different place, a different location, a different place in their mind, or a different whatever buying state if they're shackled down. You can't move someone if they're shackled. So if we can unshackle them by focusing on the belief that is keeping them stuck, well, now we get to move them to wherever we want to go. We can move them to the better way. So let's first talk about what a belief is. Now, again, if you're a Video Forex member, you probably know what a belief is. So this might be a little bit repetitive for you, but I'm just going to explain it very simply. In order for messaging, a belief is something that isn't true 100% of the time. Now, I don't care if you believe that or don't believe it. Those are all beliefs also. But if you want effective messaging, we're going to at least operate there. Because if we can operate there, that a belief is something that isn't true 100% of the time, well, that means we can always dismantle or discredit that belief. Okay. So the way I look at it is right now, the only true thing is I'm talking into a microphone and there's a camera in front of me, Matt sitting in front of me right here. Like that's truth. No one can argue against that. That's true that 100% of people would walk in here and they would be like, yep, he's talking into a microphone, camera's right there, Matt's right there. That to me is the truth. Now, where it becomes a belief is when the person starts saying, well, he's not doing a very good job on the podcast. Or someone walks in and goes like, wow, this is amazing information. Someone walks in and goes like, wow, Brandon's haircut looks really good. 100% of people aren't going to walk in here and say Brandon's haircut looks pretty good. 100% of people aren't going to walk in here and say this podcast is great. 100% of people aren't going to walk in here and say this podcast is bad. But what happens is that individual person who walks in here and says those things, they will walk out and leave as if those things are true because of the way the subconscious mind works. The subconscious automatically creates those thoughts for you without you realizing it, and then you walk away. Because if it didn't, what would happen is you would walk in here and you would go like, okay, yeah, there's a podcast mic right there, there's a camera, and there's Matt. Okay, that's true. Then the next stage would be like, okay, I'm listening to these words. Is this podcast good? Well, how do I know if it's good? What does good actually mean? How do we qualify good? And you would start to analyze it, and you would make a conscious decision on whether or not it was good, but you don't. And this is like, I forget the actual percentage, but it's in the 90s, like 96% of our decisions, actions, and conclusions are usually made for us by our subconscious, but we don't recognize it, which means our subconscious literally creates a reality in which we see the world, and we don't realize it. And that's what happens with everyone. And that's what happens with your audience, and that's what happens with your industry. And what happens is all these beliefs start to get formed, and people don't really question them. They just automatically believe them, much like you do and I do and almost everything in our life. And so what we want to do is get to that foundation. Where was that belief actually formed? Because once we operate there with our messaging, well, then we can actually start to unshackle people. We can move them to bigger and better places. So step one is we have to understand what a belief actually is. And again, that's something that isn't true 100% of the time. It's usually an interpretation or perception that we have that we didn't realize was an interpretation or perception. And we didn't realize that it wasn't true for everyone, but we lived our life as if it was. Number two is we want to focus on the belief. So when you start to dismantle these things, when you start to create content, what we want to do is we want to look at what's the point that you want to make? What's the goal here that you want to get to? And then we're going to look at what are the beliefs that people are holding that stop them from getting to that point. So when we explain why you're right, it doesn't really alter the foundation in which the belief was formed, created. And I'll give you guys an example of what I mean here. If someone went and did 5 webinars and they failed and bombed at every single one of those webinars, they likely will form a belief that webinars don't work, right? So if they have this belief that webinars don't work because they had this experience, which by the way, experience is one of the ways that beliefs are formed without us realizing it. They had a belief that webinars don't work. And I could sit there and talk about the statistics of how much money I've made with webinars. I could talk about the statistics of how many people do have webinars working. I could talk about the statistics of conversion rates of webinars and different things like that. But that's not going to change their mind. Why? Because it doesn't get to the foundation in which the belief was formed. So again, if you failed at webinars 5 times and you were convinced that webinars don't work, and I came to you with a bunch of statistics on how much money I made with webinars, or this person over there made with webinars, or what the average conversion rate on a webinar is, that isn't going to change your mind because you're going to be like, well, I just tried it 5 times and it didn't work. So clearly they don't work for me. However, if I started to find counterexamples of their competitors that are using webinars, and I said, yeah, but why does competitor A, B, and C all use webinars and they're thriving right now? They're selling to the same people. They have the same audience as you. Everything's the same, except they're successful with webinars and you're not. So clearly webinars do work. They can't really argue against that. And now what we're doing is we're getting at the foundation of the belief. We're starting to pick at the foundation of the belief. So I'm using a counterexample. And then what I could do too is I could ask him, well, how many webinars did you do? Well, I did 5. I failed at 5. And then what I can start doing is finding counterexamples of people that failed with webinars 10 times, 20 times, 30 times until their first webinar worked. And I could say like, well, Johnny over there actually first 10 webinars failed, but now he's crushing it. You've only done 5. How do you know you don't need to do just 5 more? Or Susie over here did 20 webinars and now she's doing 7 figures a year, but she failed with her first 20 webinars. How do you know you just can't do 15 more? And have you ever considered that maybe you just stopped too early and now you're living in a world where you failed at webinars? How is that serving you? How is that helping the people that you can help? And I start to pick at the foundation of the belief, which by the way, those are all sleight of mouth patterns. which we obviously teach. And so if you're a Video Forex member, then obviously you have access to all those. But now instead of like explaining why I'm right, instead of saying like, well, webinars work 33% and I've made this much money with webinars and, the webinar conversion rates average is da-da-da-da-da and all of that stuff. Now what I'm doing is picking at the foundation of the belief by using sleight of mouth patterns, which are counterexamples. Okay, so backing up, there's a couple ways to do it. So when we state something and you want someone to believe it, we always have to back up that statement. Okay, you can't just state something and move on. So let's recap what we've covered so far. We've talked about what a belief was. We talked about why we focus on the belief, which is what we just did, because I just showed you that I showed you the difference between explaining something versus persuasion and influence and backing it up and tackling the belief. So again, if we want to convince someone of something, or we want to show how our way is better, or we want to end suffering in someone's life, we have to identify the beliefs that they're holding, and then we focus on discrediting that belief versus explaining why we're right. Now let's talk about why we're here on this podcast today. Today on this podcast, we are talking about backing up a statement. And when you understand what this means, when you understand what backing up means, you're going to see that there's a massive difference between trying to explain why you're right using statistics and benefits and all that stuff versus focusing on the belief using things like metaphors, counterexamples, stories, and all of that stuff. So what I want to do is I'm actually going to read some pages from Simon Sinek's book, The Infinite Game, which I recommend to everyone to go get. It's such a good book. But what I love about these books, like I love about Simon Sinek's book, and I love the other book called Cashvertising, is I love the way they're written. And that's what I'm starting to find out, is that a lot of these books, because since we teach influence, persuasion, and messaging, we teach certain patterns and things like that. What I'm recognizing is that I really enjoy reading the books that have good influence and persuasion, like from good writers. And that's what I really love about Simon's book, is not only what he's talking about, like I love the message he has in the book, but I love the way he writes, because he is a master at all of this stuff. He's a genius at all this stuff. So what I'm going to do right now is read you a few pages, and then we're going to break down what he did here. Okay. So what he did is, and the thing that Simon does, which is really cool, is a lot of his statements. So when I say you state something and then back it up, usually the statement's only going to be like 1 or 2 lines, and then you're going to have paragraphs of backing it up. Like when we write a video series, people are like, oh, I don't know how I can write so much and blah, 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 blah. You're just picking a couple points, and then you're saying those couple points, and then you're spending paragraphs backing up that point before you can move on. And so what Simon does is he will bring you through a chapter, and you'll have like these little sub-chapters with big headlines. And then what he does with the headline is he just goes right into backing up the headline. So for this one is, he talks about a just cause. So he's talking about how every company needs a just cause inside of their business. And then what he does with that is he talks about, he goes into these examples of businesses that have a just cause versus the ones that don't, or leaders that bring a just cause into a company versus the ones that don't. So he has a ton of counterexamples. And now what his statement is that growth is not a just cause. Okay, so now he's talking about, okay, now that everyone knows what a just cause is, let's associate the difference between growth and a just cause. So here we go. Imagine you walk out of your house one morning and you see your neighbor packing up his car. Where are you going? You ask. Vacation, he replies. Nice. Where are you going? You follow up curiously. I told you, vacation, he replies. I got that, you say. But where are you going? Your neighbor replies, I told you, vacation. Realizing that your line of questioning will not reveal the answer you're looking for, you try a new strategy. Okay, you say. How do you plan to get to your vacation? And immediately your neighbor offers their plan. I'm going to drive down the I-90. My goal is to drive 300 miles per day. If the question is asked, what is your company's cause? Why does your company exist? And the answer offered is growth. That's a lot like your neighbor responding vacation to the question, where are you going? The leaders of these growth-oriented companies can rattle off their strategies and targets for growth, but that's like explaining which highway and how many miles you plan to travel when heading on vacation. It doesn't paint the picture of why you set off in the first place or where you hope to go. It doesn't offer a larger context or purpose of that growth. Money is the fuel to advance a cause. It is not a cause itself. The reason to grow is so that you have more fuel to advance the cause. Just as we don't buy a car simply so we can buy more gas, so too companies must offer more value than their ability to make money. A company, like a car, is more valuable to... Okay, we'll stop there. So the point has been made. And what Simon obviously did there is he made the statement, growth is not a just cause. And then he did an entire metaphor that was 1, 2, 3, almost an entire page, but at least the 3 paragraphs, setting up him to make his point. So he makes the statement, then goes right into a metaphor to back it up. And then as you guys can tell, he continues with that metaphor. Money is the fuel to advance the cause. Where else was it? Yep. Okay, there it is. But that's like explaining the highway and how many miles you plan to travel when heading on vacation. It doesn't paint the picture of why you set off in the first place or where you hope to go. It doesn't offer a larger context or purpose. So he sets up that entire metaphor. He makes the statement. He goes into a metaphor that he knows will make the point in a way that people will understand, so it's clear in their head, and they get the head nod effect, like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. What he didn't do is say growth is not a cause. And here's the reason why growth is not a cause. Growth is not a cause because statistically it does X, Y, and Z. Growth is not a just cause because a just cause is a definition is this, and growth does not fit into that definition. He's not explaining why he's right. He's communicating in a way that gets you to understand his point in a way where you get that head nod effect. You're like, yeah, okay, sure. Yep, that makes a lot of sense. So let's move on to another example of Simon Sinek. And this one, I'm going to read it and then we're going to talk about what he did here. But again, he made his statement. Let me pull it up right here. He's talking about the infinite mindset and the finite mindset. So the infinite mindset is the CEO or the business who's focusing on more of the long-term gain versus the short-term gain, or a cause higher than themselves versus their competitors and growth. Okay, so that's kind of the statement here. And here's what he says. When Microsoft launched the Zune, there was no grand vision for that product and how it was helping. No grand vision that the product was helping to advance. They weren't thinking about what possibilities the future might hold. It was just a competition for market share and money, one in which Microsoft wasn't doing very well. Ballmer, who is the CEO of Microsoft at the time, Ballmer's prediction that was that the Zune could beat the iPod couldn't have been more wrong. Debuting with a 9% market share, the Zune's popularity declined steadily until it hit 1% in 2010. The following year, it was discontinued. The iPad, in contrast, enjoyed around 70% slice for the same time period. Some have argued that the Zune failed because Microsoft didn't invest enough in advertising, but the theory doesn't hold up. Spanx, Sriracha, and GoPro are just 3 brands that relied solely on word of mouth to increase brand awareness. Now, let's stop right there because the bigger picture here is Microsoft and Apple. But what he did right there is he dismantled the belief. He already knew what objection was going to come up. And he said, some have argued that the Zune failed because Microsoft didn't invest enough in advertising. He knew that objection could be used to discredit his argument. He knew that people could say, well, Simon, that doesn't really hold true. It wasn't the vision thing. They just didn't invest enough money. So now what he did is he went into finding 3 major examples, counterexamples that everybody knows that didn't use advertising. And now people get the head nod effect. Like, okay, so he dismantled that objection that he knew was going to come up, so that he can further prove his point. So some have argued that the Zune failed because Microsoft didn't invest enough in advertising. But the theory doesn't hold up. Spanx, Sriracha, and GoPro are just 3 brands that relied solely on word of mouth to increase brand awareness. And notice how he positions that. They are just 3. Meaning what that infers is there's more. All 3 not only emerged from obscurity without traditional advertising, but went on to thrive without it. Others suggest that Zune failed because Microsoft was too late to the MP3 player market. This theory doesn't hold up much better. Apple itself introduced the iPad a full 5 years after MP3 players were a well-known product category. So again, he did the same thing. Here's the objection. Here's the proof that dismantles it. Brands like Rio, Nomad, and Sony were already advancing technology and selling well. Yet, within 4 years of its 2001 launch, the iPad gained the lion's share of the US digital music player market, a number that only continued to rise. As great as Microsoft's Zune may have been, it wasn't the design, marketing, or the timing of the product that were the problem. It takes more than all of those to survive and thrive in the infinite game of business. Great products fail all the time. How a company is led must also be considered. Prioritizing comparison and winning above all else. Finite-minded leaders will set corporate strategy, product strategy, incentive structures, and hiring decisions to help meet finite goals. And with a finite mindset firmly entrenched in almost all aspects of the organization, a sort of tunnel vision results. The results of which pushes almost everyone inside the company to a place of excessive force on the urgent at the expense of the important. Executives instinctively start to respond to known factors instead of exploring and advancing unknown possibilities. And so he goes on to talk about how Microsoft was and Steve Ballmer was so focused on just beating Apple and the goals and the vision that the profit, that he completely forgot about the vision, rallying the team up behind the vision, where Apple was more focused on the vision, having the just cause, and that allowed them to thrive because of it. And what he did beautifully in there, and so as you guys can tell, this entire chapter is basically between Microsoft and Apple. And there's hints here and there of him explaining what the solution is, but the majority of this paragraph or this chapter is not him explaining the solution. What it is making the case for his point. What he's doing is he's using counterexamples and he's finding the objections and he's dismantling the objections to continue moving his point forward. And this entire chapter is about Microsoft and Apple. So he'll make a point, he'll find the example with Microsoft and Apple. He'll give the solution and then say, this is exactly what Apple did. And then he'll take an objection that he knows is going to come up, and then he'll find a counterexample. And that chapter is just beautifully written. And so that's one more example of him stating something and backing it up. But his entire book is not even really him giving the answer. It's not him giving the how-to based information. It's him making a case for his points. It's him identifying the beliefs, the objections. And remember, a belief can be an industry norm, a limiting belief, or an objection. When someone has an objection, again, it's just a belief. And if something's a belief, we can always discredit it. And I'm going to read you guys one more of something he did really well. And this is story. And we actually use this in our video series where we tell a story to prove a point. And the story is relatable, at least in our video series. So here's his story, and the title of this is What is a Just Cause? Howard's Little League team was one of, if not the worst in the league. At the end of each lost game, his coach would say to the players, "It doesn't matter who wins or loses. What matters is how we played the game." At which point, the young Howard would raise his hand and ask the coach, "Then why do we keep score? When we played the finite game, we play the game to win. Even if we hope to simply play well and enjoy the game, we do not play to lose. The motivation to play in a finite game is completely different. The goal is not to win, but to keep playing. It is to advance something bigger than ourselves or our organizations. Any leader who wishes to lead in the infinite game must have a crystal clear just cause. A just cause is a specific vision of the future state that does not yet exist. A future state so appealing that people are willing to make sacrifices in order to help advance toward that vision." And then he actually goes into an example. So let's break this down. He goes into an example of a seed bank and how they never had any money, how the person ended up dying before they could get to where they wanted to go. But the team, even after his death, kept working on it, and it didn't matter to them. They would say, even if this didn't make any money, I had to spend my own time on this. The importance of the seed bank was so important to us that we would continue to do it. Again, proving Simon's point about working in that finite game and having a just cause. So if we break down what he did, is he says, what is a just cause? He used a story to talk about the difference of playing a game, playing not to lose and playing to win versus just trying to play well, related that to business. Then he gave one single paragraph on what a just cause is, and then went right into another counterexample. So if I break down him explaining what a just cause is during these 2 pages, it's literally like 3 sentences. And all we have in the beginning is a story, and then a counterexample, and then he goes back into a little bit more explaining, but then it's just followed up by another counterexample and metaphors and stories. And metaphor, analogy, and counterexamples are sleight of mouth patterns. And Simon's book is completely, and almost anybody's book is completely filled with them focusing on, here's the point, here's the proof. Here's the point, here's the proof. You have an objection. I know you have an objection. Well, here's the counterexample to dismantle that objection, dismantle this, dismantle that. And so what happens is you read, is you're absolutely forced to believe what he is saying, because he literally takes every option of you going one way or the other and takes it away from you. And that doesn't happen when we explain. It doesn't happen when we overteach, because even when we teach, people still don't have to believe us. It's your job as the entrepreneur, as a content creator, to understand your audience, understand your message so deeply that you can communicate on that level. And I'm sure Simon had a ton of researchers getting all of this research. Hey, I know this is the objection that's going to come up. I know we're going to run to this issue, this issue. Find me the research and the examples that dismantle those. And he comes to the table to write his book with all of this research, with all the case studies. And that's why messaging is something that evolves over time. I don't have a research team. You probably don't have a research team. However, the more we do this, the more we understand it, the more examples come up, the more we know how to communicate it. And this is what I talk about when I say knowing. Okay, so if I've done messaging with 1,000 students, I know the objections. I know the counterexamples. I know what they're thinking. I know what's going on in their mind. So I can communicate that in a way, just like Simon does here, because I know the language patterns. I know the beliefs. I know how to do all of that stuff. And I understand the people on such a deep level that I know where the things are going to go. I know where they're going to try to like poke a hole in what I'm saying. So I can plug that up. But that only comes through the knowing and putting things out there and trying. And so if you guys want to start doing this, you can do this in messaging, you can do this in podcasts, you can do this in videos. And I challenge you to do that. The very next time you do something and you're making a statement, this is the way. This is how you do it. Just state what it is and then do some research and find a counterexample or a metaphor, but probably a counterexample or multiple of them that are proof that what you just said is absolutely true, where no one can argue against it, and you start to get that head nod effect. And that's what today's podcast is all about. Never state something and just move on. Never try to be right. Never try to explain. You always want to back it up, persuade, and make it so clear and so compelling that the subconscious mind goes, oh yeah, that makes sense. You can do this on webinars, podcasts, videos, emails, ad copy, everywhere. And it's incredibly powerful if you master this. And again, I really recommend checking out The Infinite Game, Simon Sinek's book, because it's filled with this. And one of the best ways to really learn it is to experience it. And if you read his book, you'll definitely be able to experience it. So that's all I have for this episode. What I want you guys to do is take your biggest win, breakthrough, or whatever, and go ahead and tag us at I am Brandon Lucero. Share that on an IG story, Instagram story, tag us, And my team is going to pick the very best one that they thought was the biggest breakthrough, and we're going to give you a $25 gift card to Starbucks or Amazon, your choice. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you guys on the next episode. Hey guys, thank you so much for checking out another episode of the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, go below, hit the subscribe button, and make sure you click on that bell icon and get notified every time we drop a new episode. Now, if you're looking for the show notes, we have them linked underneath this video, as well as our social media handles and some links to free training and offers that we drop from time to time to help you guys even further. So go check those out if you're interested, and thank you so much for tuning in to the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast.